I think everyone should look into gut health because again, your gut is basically at the epicenter of your health. 70% of your immune system lies within your microbiome, your GI tract. And so that's where I think first and foremost, it's so important, especially for the prevention of chronic disease and that inflammation and everything. I think it's so important to focus on gut health, but it's
Today I had the privilege of talking to the wonderful Victoria Hasenyager. Victoria is a registered dietitian here in Greenwood Village, Colorado, and we talked about something that she and I are both passionate about, the gut. The gut, or the GI tract, is one of the things that is the basis for optimal health. It helps increase your immunity, increases your mood for better, and overall, it just makes you a better person. So if you're interested in evolving your health, stay tuned with the talk with Victoria Hasenyager. All right. Hi, everyone. Mark Foley here with Inner Evolution Fitness, bringing back registered dietitian Victoria Hasenyager. How's it going, Victoria?
good. How are you?
Doing all right. Doing all right. How's life treating you so far?
It's all right. It's treating me at least, just getting through the days, doing what I can do still.
Yep. Nothing too dramatic since the last time we talked?
No, I feel like if anything, I've gotten the hang of things a little bit more and just figuring out what I can do with my day.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are starting to get the hang of it, even though it's still not ideal. People are starting to get better, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. So I brought you back on today because I know you have a big focus with gut health and nutrition. And that's a subject that a lot of people have questions on and aren't too familiar with. So I wanted to bring you back and ask some questions.
Yeah, definitely. It's very much a hot topic or a buzzy topic right now. I feel like there's a lot of new studies coming out. There's a lot of articles and things always being posted. And I feel like there's just so much information out there. It's really hard to know, okay, what's going to be best for me? What's just a bunch of fluff? So I think it's great that we're able to talk about this today.
Yeah, I know with me, there's a lot of information out there and a lot of misinformation, like always well meaned, but just a lot of bad information also. So I definitely want to bring you on and help eliminate some of that confusion. So for you, in your opinion, what are some of the benefits for optimizing like your gut health? Or actually, let's step back. Like, what is gut health in your opinion?
So gut health is kind of a really broad term, I guess, but basically it's the state or the health of your entire GI system and then your microbiome as well. So within our GI system and throughout our intestines and things, we have what are called microbes, or very small pathogens that can help us actually break down food. They provide a lot of different things to help aid us in digestion, which is really important. And that's what I kind of like to talk about a lot with gut health, is optimizing digestion so that you're better able to break down your food and then absorb those nutrients and utilize what you need in order to function properly on a daily basis.
Oh, that sounds pretty important.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, are those like some of the major benefits to optimizing like your gut health, is like just better day-to-day health?
Yeah, so better day-to-day health, preventing any kind of chronic disease issues, so like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, things like that, that can happen later down on the line if you're not taking proper care of your body and of your digestion. It can help decrease inflammation. It can optimize your mood. It can prevent things like depression, anxiety, or at least help with some of those things as well.
Okay.
But for me, the biggest one that I work a lot with is just really the improved digestion, absorbing nutrients just from a dietetic standpoint, because I want everyone to be able to absorb everything properly, not have a lot of bloating, gas, and things like that.
Okay. So if people are maybe coming in malnourished, would you start with like gut health? So they would actually digest and absorb all the things that they're eating?
Yeah, so if I'm worried about someone being malnourished or if I feel like they're deficient in some nutrients, I would definitely start with the gut first. I feel like all disease and things can kind of start in the gut.
Yeah.
So I would look to see, are you breaking down your food properly? Because if you're not, that's, of course, you're not going to be able to absorb your nutrients because you can't even break it down to those simple substrates.
Sure. That makes sense. That makes sense. So, like, um, a lot of people, or excuse me, a lot of the health professionals that I listen to talk about like gut health when they're focusing more on like the autoimmune disease. Is that something also that it could help with? And like they're talking about only people with autoimmune should focus on it, but it seems like with you, you think pretty much everyone should be kind of focusing on it to help optimize like digestion, mood, and just overall health. Is that something right?
Yeah, I think everyone should really focus on it. And of course, those with autoimmune disease, that is definitely something that's like top priority to kind of work on first is trying to figure out, okay, what foods are causing the systemic reaction that your body is now attacking its own tissues.
Mm-hmm.
And that does start with gut health, if there's some sort of permeability between these tight junctions. So, and throughout our digestive tract, especially in our intestines, we have epithelial cells, and those are our cells that line basically the lining of our intestines. But between that, we have these protein complexes called tight junctions.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, what can happen is those can become permeable, which we don't want because that's when undigested food and proteins can leak out, things like gluten or gliadin. And that's especially when that can kind of go out into the body to other tissues and our body ends up attacking it or there's this immune response. But sometimes things like gluten, what can happen, especially with like thyroid tissues, that's where I see it a lot, is your body starts attacking those tissues because it looks so similar to that protein.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Mhm.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you're saying like with like say gluten and celiac like problems, is that all based around like the junctions within the intestinal wall?
Yeah, it definitely can be. So what happens is, at least with foods that contain gluten or gliadin, especially in wheat, I know that's one food that a lot of people have issues with, especially if you have some sort of autoimmune issue,
Mm-hmm.
is when you do consume that food, what can happen is those epithelial cells actually release a substance called zonulin,
Yeah.
and zonulin directly acts on those tight junctions and it makes them permeable, which again, we don't want. And some people will ask the question, well, why does our body even create a substance like that if it's actually going to be really harmful for us?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's actually kind of a protective mechanism. So if we've ever had some sort of like foodborne illness, which can happen with like things like E. coli, Shigella, there's a bunch of different other ones, but that actually ends up getting released when you consume some sort of foodborne pathogen,
Mm-hmm.
because then it gets released into the body so that your immune system can attack it and you can expel it either through, you know, throwing up or,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Very cool. That's
Mhm.
actually pretty good to know. All right. So like seems like everything can be benefited by helping out with your gut health. Like for you, what do you do with your clients or what do you start people with? Like, do you have a protocol? Like, what's step one for you to optimize gut health?
So step one for me is addressing sleep and stress, and then just kind of getting a baseline diet, something kind of like I talked about last episode, where it's really just trying to get to that point where you're consuming carbs, fat, and protein, regularly, trying to balance your insulin and that glucose response just because you don't want any additional inflammation. And
Mhm.
it's just creating that baseline diet so we can kind of really figure out, okay, what foods are actually bothering you, especially now that you're eating on a regular schedule and a balanced meal and balanced snacks as well. So that's where I kind of start, at least with food. And then I think sleep and stress are so important to address, because if your body is overwhelmed with stress, no amount of removing of food, no amount of any other kind of repair things that we work on is really going to help, because that's a root cause issue. And then at the same time, sleep, if you're not sleeping, you're not able to repair at night, your hormones are definitely going to be off, and it's just like this whole cascade effect. So those are the three main things that I kind of address at first.
Okay. Okay. Very nice. So a lot of people talk about starting with gut health. They talk about like probiotics and fiber and stuff like that. But for you, it seems like stress and sleep are some of the bigger ones that you start with first.
Yeah, just because I want there to be a good foundation so that when we actually do start to incorporate things and re-inoculate your body with those probiotics, or if we're making sure you've got enough fiber so your bowel movements are healthy and all these other different things, that it's actually able to work. Because otherwise it's just like putting band-aids on something.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so what else do you do like beyond that? Like once like sleep and stress and all that is starting to optimize, what's like where do you go from there, or is that very individualized per person?
Um, it's obviously very individualized per person, but what I've laid out is basically addressing those foundational things first. Eating regular meals, regular times, sleep, stress, but then I go into kind of the removal of any food triggers that might be bothersome. So the main ones that I usually see are gluten, corn, and dairy. I don't usually take out a bunch of other different foods that I know some people can take out, like legumes and beans and FODMAPs and things like that, unless I'm specifically working with someone who's been diagnosed with SIBO. Then that's when I would probably, do a more complex removal of the diet. But along with that, I also talk to them about certain medications and things that can be an issue. So those are NSAIDs, PPIs, which are like proton pump inhibitors,
Mhm.
and any other sort of antacid, just because, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is stomach acid being a huge factor for kind of what's going on in optimizing gut health, and then alcohol, and then processed cooking oils and sugar substitutes. So it's kind of a lot of things all at once when you throw all of that in there, which is why I don't like to take out many other foods, especially foods that I think could be beneficial for
Mhm.
you long term.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That sounds like a lot, but it seems like you do it like per person to figure out what's going on then, huh?
Yeah. Well, first I kind of assess, all right, well, have you ever tried the removal or an elimination diet before? What's your diet like now? What things do you notice that really set you off, cause bloating or any other kind of issues, diarrhea, constipation, and
Mhm.
things like that? Are you even on NSAIDs? Are you even on a PPI? Have you taken antibiotics in the past? That's another medication that can really throw things out of whack. So that's where I kind of first start. And sometimes this process is a little bit slow, trying to talk to them and educate them why I'm removing these foods, what you can do to replace those foods to make sure that you still have a balanced diet and things like that. And
Mhm.
then once we've got that, then it's, the next step. So that's when I'll go in and start to replace things like stomach acid. I feel like a lot of times people who have some GI issues actually, especially if they've got heartburn or if they feel like maybe they're not breaking things down the right way, it's because their stomach acid is actually a little too high.
Mhm.
We need to lower that pH. So that's why I definitely want them to get off of PPI, because they may think they have, really low stomach acid. So they're taking something that suppresses it,
Mhm.
when really it's kind of that opposite or reverse. Um, and then also maybe some digestive enzymes or something that we could talk about to help replace if I feel they're not properly able to break things down. Or I really like, well, first, before the enzymes, what I'll do is I'll have them try digestive bitters to see if that helps, because that actually stimulates your own digestive juices and your own enzymes. So that way you don't have to take anything that's exogenous, and see if your body's actually capable of doing it itself.
Gotcha. So for the digestive bitters, are you talking about like dandelion root and like really bitter Veggies, or what are you talking about with that?
So basically, the US standard diet is pretty low in any bitter tasting sort of vegetables or foods. So that's no wonder why some people might have issues kind of digesting things, but it's that bitter like taste or scent on your tongue that actually stimulates your like secondary digestive organs. So your main organs are basically your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine, or your colon.
Hmm.
Those are the ones that are directly dealing with food, impact by food. But then you've got your secondary organs. So that's like your liver, your gallbladder, and your pancreas. And your gallbladder and liver are what make and store bile and secrete bile. And bile is what helps us break down the fats that we consume. And then you've got your pancreas, which not only makes hormones, but it also makes and secretes those digestive enzymes into the stomach to help you really break things down.
Gotcha. Okay. So, would like vinegar, like a lot of people talk about apple cider vinegar, would that fall into that category as well for a digestive bitter?
I wouldn't count it as a digestive bitter. I actually count it as more of an acidic agent. So what it really does is it helps decrease that pH in your stomach to that optimal level, which is what we want to further help break down food as well.
Okay.
Um, but no, so they're more based like herbs and things that you can take. I like one that is non-alcohol based, just again because alcohol can have some problems, and a lot of times tinctures or herbal supplements, especially in liquid form, they have an alcohol agent that helps them. So I usually look for things that are more like glycerin or water based, and the one that I usually recommend is, and it's just an easy spray. Um, and again, that's just like a more natural way to help stimulate your own body to do what it naturally is supposed to do.
Yeah, yeah, I've tried some of the liquids in the past, and mine wasn't alcohol based, and it was interesting, but I
Mhm.
didn't have any digestive issues at the time. I was just trying it out because I always enjoy experimenting on those type of
Yeah,
things.
and I've tried it too. I usually try everything before I recommend it just because I think it's,
Yeah, well, in the end, that's how you learn more. Yeah,
yeah,
so,
definitely.
for sure. So you also talked about like balancing out insulin earlier,
Mhm.
and it seems like your approach is like just eating a very balanced meal, like protein, fat, and carbs. Is there any other techniques or things that you suggest for balancing out insulin, like overall?
So you'll definitely want to look into like fiber and things along those lines as well,
Hmm.
just because, and I feel like you've asked me this too before, but kind of going into those like prebiotics or the resistant starch.
Hmm.
So that's actually what can increase insulin sensitivity, and we want to increase insulin sensitivity because it basically enhances its function of bringing that glucose into the cell. So we don't have glucose around in our blood, kind of wreaking havoc. And then our cells are actually able to use that glucose for energy for a number of different functions as well. Um, so yeah, that's definitely something that I always like to talk about is making sure that you increase your fiber intake, both like insoluble or soluble or that resistant starch component.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's actually one of the benefits that a lot of people don't realize that comes with like strength training. Is you
Mm-hmm.
become more sensitive to insulin, which is great. So that's just another byproduct to help people if they're wanting to lose fat or become control their insulin better. Like working out helps a ton
Yeah,
with that. So
definitely. And I always recommend that my clients try and get, you know, 150 minutes of physical activity per week. And I usually recommend trying to do strength training. I don't recommend anything past that because that's not my area of expertise. It's out of my scope of practice, but definitely, like you said, trying to increase that strength training.
very cool. Very cool. So you talked about like kind of an elimination diet. Do you recommend people just doing like a broad one, like a Whole 30, or do you like to concentrate it more to the person? Because Whole 30 is pretty popular with people, and a lot of people do it trying to lose weight, but they don't realize that it's more of an elimination diet and to figure out what foods they should and shouldn't eat.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your approach with eliminating foods?
Um, So again, with the elimination of foods, the main ones are usually that gluten, the corn, and the dairy. And I try not to add too much more to that just because along the lines of trying to get out those processed omega-6 fatty acids,
Yeah.
like canola oil or rapeseed oil, corn oil, safflower oil,
Yeah.
soybean oil, all of these, which are already really processed too, and they're
Hmm.
usually heat treated. And then there's the whole thing of like free radicals, and it can just cause a lot of inflammation in the body. So it's usually that, and then sugar, and sugar substitutes. Stevia is usually all right, but mostly like the sugar substitutes, especially the polyols like xylitol, mannitol, sorbitol,
Hmm.
things like that, just because that can cause a lot of digestive issues as well. But that's kind of where I start. And then I usually have them track in this app. It's called My Symptoms, which is an incredible app. There's so many different things that it can ask you. So every time you have a bowel movement, you log it, and then you rate it on the Bristol stool scale. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. Um, but basically, if you look up the Bristol stool scale, it has pictures and it defines each kind of different bowel movement. And you want a really healthy one around like 3 or 4. If
Hmm.
you have 7, that basically means you're having diarrhea. If you have 1, you're incredibly constipated. So it's got that. You log all your food, you can log your stress, you log your mood, you can log your environment, and then you rate all your symptoms as well. And if there's not a symptom on there, like I think gas and bloating, or if you have like some skin disturbances, that's not on there, but you're able to add that too. And then over time, what it can do is it computes everything, and then you can export it and send it to your provider like me, and I'm able to assess and figure out, okay, well, what foods are really going on, and bothering you in some way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
That way you don't have to spend all the money to do something like a food sensitivity test.
Yeah.
Or trying Whole30 can be good, but it does eliminate a lot of foods.
Hmm.
It really changes the way you eat. But I do like some things because it just goes back to that natural, more whole foods based way of eating, which is why I think a lot of people see some good results.
Fantastic. Okay, that's some good information. I haven't heard of that app, but that
Mhm.
seems like it's taken putting health in your hands, like the client's hands, instead of like just throwing it all on you, so you can track all the stuff and get a better amount of data.
Exactly.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Um, can you explain to me and also anyone listening the difference between prebiotics and probiotics and what all it is? Because again, a lot of people start with gut health by just throwing these band-aids on it without optimizing like the sleep
Mhm.
stress, like anything that's causing inflammation. Like I assume after that you might want to introduce like pre and probiotics. Like, and I assume you prefer it in like a whole food type of term instead of like supplements. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, probiotics and prebiotics, they are different, but they work hand in hand together. So probiotics are the actual live cultures that you can eat or digest, and they come about through the fermentation process. So things that you can actually find them in are yogurt, kefir,
Mhm.
sauerkraut, kimchi, any of those types of foods, miso. And these are the actual live bacteria, and that's actually what is in your digestive system as well, are these microbes, these living organism, that's what makes up um, your microbiome essentially. So of course it can be great to add some more good bacteria to your gut, just because like I said earlier, they actually help you break down your food.
Right.
um, they can do a lot of other things too, but essentially that's why it can be so good to take. And I usually do recommend that you end up re-inoculating with some sort of probiotic down the line in my little protocol, but it's not until like the 4th or 5th step,
Mhm.
until we've already started to work on some other things. If someone's already taking a probiotic, I tell them you can still take it. Obviously, you've spent money on it, finish
Mhm.
it. And then once you finish it down the line, then we'll give you another probiotic. And then the prebiotic is actually more of like a fiber, which can be found in foods like artichokes, asparagus, chicory, onions, leeks. Then there's like your legumes and things like that. These all have um, this fiber. So fiber is not actually broken down by our own digestive enzymes and through our own digestion. So it goes through the stomach and the small intestine, basically intact or unscathed, until you get to the large intestine. And then that's where a lot of your microorganisms live, and they are able to feed off of this. And when they do, what happens is they create some gas, but they also can turn it into fat, essentially, in these short chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate, and acetate, which does a wonder of other like health benefits as well, which is why it's so good to have a good balanced microbiome with all these different good guys, and then also feed them, because then once they're fed, they're able to produce more good guys and then more of these short chain fatty acids, which is basically like fuel for your intestinal cells, and then they can go to other tissues in your body and help heal them and give them all these other good things too.
Yeah, I've actually heard that. Well, I learned more about like prebiotics and fiber and stuff like that by learning more about cows. That they produce those the short chain fatty acids from all the grass that they eat. So they actually run more off of fat than like well
Mm-hmm.
the small amount of carbohydrates found in like grass. So yeah, learning about that is very interesting for sure. So
Yeah. And especially like on a leaky gut or that intestinal hyperpermeability standpoint,
mhm.
or that autoimmunity standpoint, things like short chain fatty acids like butyrate are really good because they help heal that tissue damage and that lining with your gut that's become permeable.
Yeah,
But it also can help you absorb nutrients and things like calcium. It can be preventive against like colorectal cancer. And
mhm.
there's so many other wonderful things that they're finding out about. These short chain fatty acids that are actually produced by those probiotics or those microbes in your intestines, but they need to be fed those prebiotics as well, which is why I don't like to necessarily remove a lot of those foods, because they help
Yeah,
break things down.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So earlier you talked about eliminating like some processed sugars, and in my opinion, the ultimate processed and inflammatory thing is like the cooking oils.
Hmm.
You talked about like canola and like sunflower and rapeseed and just the whole laundry list. Like that's pretty hard to avoid. Where if you get anything like that's not home cooked, it's probably has that in there.
Yeah.
So what do you suggest for people to try to avoid that? Like minimize what they do when they go out to eat, and like what's some oils that you do recommend?
So definitely, when you're able to actually go to the store, if you're buying processed foods, look at the back of the ingredient list. And it'll tell you what oil they use as part of their cooking and preparation process. And I usually say, if you can, really try and stay away from those foods. If you look within the aisle, there's usually a bunch of different foods as well. Sometimes there's better alternatives.
Mhm.
Something that people don't usually know with the ingredient list, everything is listed in order of how much is actually in it. So if you're comparing a couple items, what you can do is at least try and find an item where that like canola or that corn oils may be lower in the list, because technically there's not as much. Um, when you're going out, definitely you can ask the restaurants too, like, hey, what kind of oil is this? Like, I have some issues with this.
Yeah,
Or, try and find, there's so many restaurants now that are really accommodating for things like that and are actually trying to move in the direction of using less processed omega-6 rich oils. And then along with that, the ones that I do recommend, or at least the fats that I recommend for cooking, are olive oil, because it's very high in omega-3s. I usually say try not to cook at it at too high of a temperature, because you can actually create free radicals and some damage.
Sure.
And you basically burn the oil. So if you've ever put it on a pan that's really hot, you'll see that smoke come off,
Mhm.
which means it's past that smoke point. So each oil has its own smoke point, which has come out a lot more recently too. I feel like avocado is getting a lot of buzz because it actually has a higher smoke point. So if you're going to be cooking at high temperatures, usually I recommend using that one. Although I recommend not consuming dairy if we're trying to do some sort of an elimination diet. Um, Butter can be good, but also ghee has a higher smoke point than butter does, and it also is hot, like a good source of butyric acid, which eventually becomes butyrate, like we've already talked about. And then I also like algae oil, which a lot of people don't know about, but it's got a really high smoke point as well. It's like
Okay.
500 degrees.
Wow.
So you can look into that as well.
Algae oil. Okay. What about your opinions on, say, like lard or tallow or anything along those lines?
Um, It honestly depends on the client. So I would have to look at their lab, see how things are going on. But I just feel like a lot of people don't use them as well. So it's not something that I normally recommend because people are like lard or tallow. Like I don't want to use duck fat.
Yeah, for sure. What about like coconut oil? That's another popular
Oh
one.
yeah, coconut oil is definitely a good one as well that I like. But you also have to pay attention to the smoke point
Mhm.
on that as well. Out of a lot of them, it is one of the only saturated plant-based oils. That and palm oil is as well.
Mhm.
But I usually don't have an issue with coconut oil. I don't recommend that.
Gotcha. So we went over a lot right here, but what are some symptoms or something that will give people a clue that they really need to start focusing on their gut health? Because you said a lot of things that can fluctuate a lot. You talked about like mood and stress and stuff like that.
Mhm.
What are some things that point you to like, hey, we really need to focus on your gut health? Or is that something that you recommend everyone start with if they're looking to optimize?
I think everyone should look into gut health because again, your gut is basically at the epicenter of your health. 70% of your immune system lies within your microbiome, your GI tract. And so that's where I think first and foremost, it's so important, especially for the prevention of chronic disease and that inflammation and everything. I think it's so important to focus on gut health, but especially if someone's noticing any symptoms like diarrhea, constipation, if they're not sleeping well, if they do have pretty erratic moods, or if they feel like they've got that brain fog, if
Mm,
they've got a bunch of skin irritations or joint pain or that inflammation. And those are kind of the things where I'm like, okay, well, maybe we definitely need to address and see
yeah,
what's going on.
yeah. And in my understanding, like a lot of people should definitely focus on it more if they've taken like a big series of like antibiotics and stuff as that as well, right?
Yeah, so basically antibiotics wipe out all of those microbes, or not all, but they wipe out a very significant amount
Yeah.
within that microbiome or your own GI tract. And I also want to say that everyone's microbiome is completely different. Yours is different than mine, than like Tracy, the owner of Everyday Nutrition, of, anyone else that you see walking down the street. Um, so that's also important to note, but especially when you do take those antibiotics, and like I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
that's one of the medications that I usually try to get people to come off of if they don't need it, or if they've been on some sort of chronic dose of those antibiotics, is because it does wipe out a lot of that flora. It wipes out the bad bacteria, which is usually what it's used for, but it
Mhm.
wipes out the good guys too.
Yeah.
So there are different strands of probiotics that you then can take. I usually recommend, if someone's going to take a probiotic, that you usually want to have like 50 to 100 billion CFUs with 10 to 12 different strands
Okay.
of lactobacillus and then bifidobacterium. So those are like the main genomes, but within that there's all different types. And within those different types, they're starting to come out with actual studies just using those to figure out, okay, well, does this one maybe help with that post-antibiotic therapy? Does this one help if you've ever had some foodborne illness? This one might help with inflammation. So And that's something that's interesting that's coming out in the research as well.
Fantastic. Okay, that's all good stuff. That's really
Mhm.
good. Um, so what are some of the like final things? Because I'll go a little bit personal. Like I think I have a pretty good gut health. Like
Mhm.
I don't take antibiotics. I don't do the processed sugars or cooking oils. If I do, it's very limited. Stress, sleep, and insulin is pretty well managed. Like for me, like I still see some problems like skin irritation, stuff like that. What are some things that you would potentially recommend to me if I have some of those bigger bases covered?
Mhm. So that's where I kind of go to, like, are you taking a probiotic? That might be helpful
Hmm.
depending on what probiotic you take. But also, again, it just goes back to making sure that your digestion is optimal,
Mm.
making sure that you consume a variety of food. So that's honestly, I think, the most important thing, and that's why, again, I try not to eliminate too many things from the diet other than the things that are just incredibly processed, or those big hitters that can cause things like leaky gut and make autoimmune diseases kind of exacerbate in some sort of way. But going back to that fiber, and that resistant starch that kind of feeds those microbes. So um, a lot of times people will talk about how some of those foods are harder for them to break down or digest. It causes that bloating, that gas.
Mhm.
Um, but it's honestly because our body is only equipped with about like 17 enzymes to kind of break down those starchy or those fibrous foods. So a lot of them go through our digestive tract where they're not able to be broken down, but our microbes actually, there's like 60,000 different like hydrolases or enzymes that they can use to break down these foods. But if you're not consuming a wide enough variety of different fruits, vegetables, these fibers, then those good guys aren't getting fed. And what happens is you're losing your ability to actually break down these foods as well. And then your population of commensal bacteria in your intestines just isn't as strong. So I usually say get as much variety as you possibly can to kind of help, feed those good guys and keep them going.
That's great advice. That's really good advice. Okay. Um, are you a fan of like the powders, like a green powder? Like, say, if you can't get like all the colors of the rainbow and all these different varieties of fruits and veggies and whatnot, are you a fan of that, or do you think that's just like not doing you any good?
I think if someone is not eating a wide variety and it's hard for them to get into their diet, sure, you can definitely do that. I would recommend it more if you're trying to get different vitamins and minerals, but you're still missing that key aspect of that fiber that actually comes from the plants themselves.
Yeah,
And
that
that
makes
fiber is actually what is feeding those good guys. So that's why I say try and get it from food if you can. There are different fiber supplements as well that you can take if you feel like you want to actually supplement what you're already doing within your diet. So that's something that you can look into. The different ones that I really like, at least soluble fibers that are going to help feed those guys, are the acacia fiber. I've also heard it pronounced acacia.
mhm.
I'm not really sure.
I've heard about that.
I usually just say acacia. And then there's like beta glucan, which comes from mushrooms or that fungi.
Mhm.
And that's another great fiber. And it's also really great for your immune system as well. They're finding that it's actually the beta glucan from mushrooms that have all of these amazing properties that help with the immunity and especially with like an autoimmune kind of condition.
Yeah.
Um, so those are also some supplements and things that you can take.
Okay. Do you like the psyllium husks and like the chicory roots and stuff like that, or do you prefer those two?
Um, Chicory root is okay. I know that some people can actually have some adverse effects with that. So I usually say if you do it, you want to try and start slow with any kind of fiber. It's low and slow. Too much too soon, just like working out. Like if you try and deadlift or bench press like hundreds of pounds and
Hmm.
you don't build yourself up to it,
Right.
you're going to end up getting hurt or something's going to happen. So again, same thing with fiber, whether it's soluble, like the ones I mentioned, or insoluble, like that psyllium husk.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely low and slow, stay hydrated as well. But I do love psyllium husk, especially if I feel like someone is either constipated or they have diarrhea that I just feel like they need something to bulk up that stool and like move things through.
Hmm.
That's when I definitely recommend that.
Fantastic. Okay. Really good information. That's a lot more information than I was expecting. That's for sure. So that's great.
Yeah.
That's really good. So I'm sure I'm gonna have to re-listen to this myself. So to make sure I get everything down. But that's great. Okay. Um, yeah. Is there anything else that you think that people would benefit from in
Um,
terms of learning more about their gut health?
I'm trying to think. I mean, there's just so much to gut health and there's so many moving parts, but I think the most important thing to know is our entire body, it's a combined amount of systems. So usually when one thing is affected, another thing becomes affected, and it's this downward spiral, or it can actually be a good upward spiral. So again, it's just trying to feed the microbes that you have, trying to have that variation in your diet is super important,
Yeah.
but also trying to limit your stress, because if you're really stressed out, what happens is your digestive system is like a lot, it has a lot of different muscles and different contractions that go into it to help move things. Again, trying to get that stomach acid and those secretions to be right to help you break down the food. Those all become affected when you're incredibly stressed. You're in that fight or flight mode all the time.
Sure.
So again, like I talked about last time, before you eat, try that take 5 breathing technique to help put your body into that relaxed state.
Mhm.
And then just try and get a good amount of sleep. I actually read an article this morning that took like 14,000 different people and had them track their bowel movements and their sleep. And they measured sleep as adequate sleep as 7 to 8 hours. And then they have like a lot more sleep. So it's basically like 9 to 10 hours or less than 7 hours.
Mhm.
And then they took their like bowel movement ratings and how they were doing. And they found that those that slept less than 7 hours a night are actually up to like 30 times percent more prone to becoming constipated. And that constipation, when people have a lot of bloating or gas, they don't know that it's actually because they're constipated. And you can be constipated even if you've already had a bowel movement in the day and you just didn't expel everything out and you've still got some feces like in your colon. And that's when you can still have a lot of issues.
Crazy, crazy. Well, that's that goes back to like having a good basis of like lowering the stress and
Hmm.
sleeping and
Yeah.
then just eating well. So yeah, that like you were saying, it's a lot of moving parts for sure. A lot of moving parts
Definitely. And that's why I always try to really hit those head on first so we can just establish that foundation, so then we know what's actually becoming a trigger for you, instead of we can take out those other factors of, okay, well, we know we've got stress and sleep taken care of, so what else could be an issue?
for sure. Yeah, yeah, but always start with that. But probably, I can only assume that if you fix that, like 80% of the problems will start to alleviate. Then, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot of studies coming out just about circadian rhythm balance and people with like IBS or IBD, their symptoms actually improving just because they're able to repair their tissues at night, getting that first like exposure of sun that helps you, then that sets everything up for the day hormone wise, like cortisol. It helps melatonin production naturally at night, which helps you sleep. And
Yeah.
again, it's all systems processes that kind of go hand in hand together.
So many things to learn, and but it's so simple if you look at it. You just need
Just going back to the basics. Yeah.
exactly just sleep and don't try to minimize your stress. And yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Well, this has all been really good, Victoria. Very good. All right. Well, I don't think I have any other questions, but I appreciate it. And if anyone wants to work with you to help optimize their health and their like, if they have any GI questions, where can people contact you?
People can definitely, so the website is now fully up and running again. So if you go to everydaynutritionllc.com, You can actually go online and schedule an appointment with Tracy or myself. And then you can also call, I don't have the number on me right now, but if you go to our website, the phone number's on there, contact information is on there. We're also on Facebook at Everyday Nutrition as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Victoria. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. Thank you for having me again.
All right. Well, we're going to sign off, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.